Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about some more famous flutists. If you haven't seen the first video in the series, go check that out. I start really with the beginning of the modern era for flute with Theobald Boehm and go through the French school. Some of those people are going to be referenced in this video, so if you don't know who they are, go watch that one first. This one's going to focus on the British flutists of the early through mid 20th century. They're not like the biggest names right now, though some of them are still, but they are kind of the first generation of British flutists to really be important in the grand scheme of the flute world. So the first flutist is Geoffrey Gilbert. He was born in 1914 and died in 1989. He was born in Liverpool and studied at the Royal Manchester College of Music. He then went on and studied in France with Meiksins. And that's a big deal because up until then, the British were playing on wooden flutes with no vibrato. Gilbert, having studied with Meiksins, came back to Great Britain and started teaching the French school, with British influences, of course, because he's a British flutist. But he really started integrating the advancements that the French had made into the British style of playing. And without him, you don't get some of the people I'm going to talk about later. He played in the London Philharmonic and he taught at his alma mater, Royal Manchester College of Music. Later in life, he moved to the US and taught at Stetson University in Florida. The next person is Albert Cooper, who you may have heard me talk about. He was born in 1924 and died in 2011, and he was a really incredible flute maker. And I'm a little biased, I'm aware. He really kind of studied flutes and really focused on making them better, not just making them the same way they had always been made. And a lot of you may know Brandon Cooper. The Cooper part of that name is Albert Cooper. He, over the course of his career and building flutes, came up with a new scale for the flute. The scale of the flute is the way the keys are placed on the instrument, the spacing between them, and the size of the tone holes. And that affects the tuning and the timbre and a lot of how flute functions. Before Cooper came along, the flutes that were being played on were really inconsistent. If you play a really old Powell or Haynes, you can kind of see that. They're not necessarily consistent in tuning or timbre through the instrument, and that's just because no one had really looked into the scale as much as Cooper did. And there's been people since Cooper who have worked off of that. We're going to talk about one of them later. But he really created a system that's still used today. A lot of makers sell Cooper scale flutes, and then of course there's Brandon Cooper who have it in the name. He also built head joints and started working a lot with the cut of the head joint and the riser and how that affects the sound. He was really just a flute technician, and he pushed the technology of flute forward. If you guys want to see more about my personal experience with Cooper instruments, you can check out my flute buying video and talk about it there. So the next person is William Bennett. He was born in 1936 and is still alive. He was a student of Geoffrey Gilbert and also studied at Guildhall, which is one of the major music schools in London. He also went to France and studied with Paul and Meiksins. So he continued Gilbert's tradition of bringing the French school over and combining it with this new generation of British flute playing. He is probably the most important British pedagogue in the world and just overall an incredibly important teacher, but he was also a really big player in his own right. He's played with basically every major British orchestra and has his own record label called Beep Records. He's recorded an incredible number of CDs, and then he also has really pushed the flute and guitar rep forward with his collaboration with guitarist Julian Bream. He teaches at the Royal Academy of Music, which is one of the other schools in London, and he runs a summer academy in the States. He's been traveling and teaching all around the world for years. At this point, he's kind of known more for his teaching than his playing, but that's still an incredible influence on the flute world. What I was talking about with Cooper, that some people have modified his scale, is really Bennett. He's also really interested in flutes and the same way Cooper was, liked tinkering with flutes and figuring out how to make them better. There are some flutes that are built with the Bennett scale, which is his own scale for the flute keys. And my teacher at Indiana tells this great story of you had to kind of guard your head joints from him because he would literally just carve bits and pieces out of the tone hole if he didn't like it. So he really does know flute. Next is Trevor Y. He was born in 1935, also still alive. You guys probably know this name because of his incredibly popular book series. But he's actually a very interesting person because he never went to music school or conservatory. He studied privately with Jeffrey Gilbert and Meiksins. There's a theme here, as the last video showed as well. But he never actually did a music degree. He's taught at Guildhall and the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. He is, again, best known for his practice books. He has created a huge library of technical books and integrating excerpts and technical studies and a lot of other things into his playing. He's also big on building flutes and making sure that they're made right. Again, my teacher at Indiana tells the story of how William Bennett hated her flute and was like, oh, just send it to Trevor and he'll fix it. She was a little nervous about sending the flute that she had paid so much money to get whatever he was going to do to it, so she kind of sent him her backup flute, and they basically pulled off all the key work, moved the keys around, moved the holes around, and then put the keys back on and bent them so that they covered the holes. And it looked a little bit not so elegant, but it played better. Unfortunately, that flute was lost on a train in England about 20 years ago, but the story is still pretty fantastic. And the last one is James Galway. I kind of can't make this list without including him. He was born in 1939 and again is also still alive. He was the next Rumpel. He's one of the most famous flutists ever to live, and he is a soloist. Yes, he played in orchestras, but he is really known as a soloist. He was born in Belfast, and he went to the Royal College of Music in London and Guildhall as well, and studied with Jeffrey Gilbert. He also studied with Rumpel and Meiksins, since that seems to be what everyone did. He was the principal of the Berlin Philharmonic, but decided to leave to become a soloist, much to the chagrin of Unkarian. He has an incredibly large recording library. He's probably recorded almost every standard work in existence. Honestly, you can probably find a Galway recording of most of the top 100 pieces in the flute repertoire. He has also commissioned a ton of music. The Lieberman Concerto was written for him. Corgliano and Arnold also wrote for him. So he's also been a really big proponent of contemporary music, albeit slightly more conservative contemporary music. He's really the rock star of the flute world, and while all of us might have our own opinions of him, you can't really knock the fact that he really made flute a legitimate thing. His wife, Jeannie Galway, is also an incredibly important teacher and player, but she is American and isn't going to be included in this particular list. So those are kind of the top 5 flutists of the 20th century in Great Britain. If you think I missed anyone, please let me know. I'd love to include them in later videos, and if there's anyone that's specific that you want me to talk about in future videos, also please let me know. I'm trying to cover as many people as I can, but obviously I'm gonna miss a few. If you guys like this video, please give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. If you want to support me more, please check out my Patreon. And as always, the call for the 52 Weeks of Flute project is linked in the description, as is the Untwelve Call. If you guys don't know about that, go check it out. It's a microtonal only call that me and 3 other musicians are involved in, and we're really excited about it. I'll see you guys soon.